to Pod My Noggin. Thanks for tuning in again this week. And this week we are joined by Mr. Jason Tuttle. Did I say it right?
That is correct.
Perfect. Well, welcome, Jason, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So, Jason, one of the things that we're going to talk about, several things throughout today's episode, but one of the things, as I had mentioned before, is that really caught my attention in what I'm trying to do with Pod My Noggin,
Okay.
is sort of have conversations surrounding mental health. And what stuck out big way for me is that you are really focused on trying to teach men how to be vulnerable, to process emotions, and to talk about mental health, right? And
Correct.
we have a lot of supports in today's society for mental health. We still have a lot of ways to go. But one of the forgotten groups often is men. And I'll briefly tell you why it's such an important cause for me. It's because systemically, from our nuclear families, we're not taught as men on how to process emotions in a healthy way, on how to communicate in a healthy way. It's generational. Big boys don't cry, right?
Exactly.
Those sort of things. And this stuff is sort of ingrained in us since we're little boys. Then you grow up and you're a man in the world and you have none of the tools or even the know-how to process emotions safely. So we see this we've been seeing this forever. Now I do see a few conversations happening around men's mental health. And so I'm on a mission as a part of many things that I want to do in life is to bring those stories to the forefront. You're still going to be met with macho men who are like, no, like that's still happening, right? But there are men out there who want to know how to properly process emotion and to feel that they can talk about it. So we're going to talk about that today. But what I think we should do is perhaps maybe take a step back and about how Jason got here to this point. And let's start at the beginning, if you will.
Certainly. Just to give you a little backstory, if you will, I'm a married father of, this year will be 21 years. I have 2 kids, both with multiple mental and physical disabilities, some rare conditions thrown in there as well. As a career, I'm a career educator, although I left education several years ago to be a stay-at-home parent for both of my kids because of all of their medical issues. And of my 2 kids, my son was the more medically fragile of the 2. And so, for example, in the first 5 years of his life, I was in and out of the hospital literally every 6 months. Because of what his rare condition, he was very susceptible to respiratory related illnesses. And so I always knew that when cold and flu season came, sometime in between about October and about March, I knew I was going to be admitted into the hospital, even with the medical knowledge that I had to take care of him and the medical machinery I had at the house. I knew that if I didn't catch it fast enough, I was going to be in the hospital. And almost inevitably, again, at least once or twice a year for the first 5 years of his life, I was in the hospital. And it got to the point where instead of going to one of the main floors, we went up to one of the ICU floors just because one of those floors had the machinery that we needed. So we always got admitted there because it was right there readily available versus them having to bring it down, if you will. And it was just easier to be right there. So, in the, my daughter's 16, my son would have been 18 this year. In the 18 years that I've been kind of a part of the special needs world, we faced a lot of adversity. We faced a lot of ups, a lot of downs, a lot of, wins and losses just throughout life. But to give you an idea of my kids, both of my kids are nonverbal. Both of them are epileptic. They have seizures. In fact, of the 6 different kinds of seizures, I've seen 4 of them in my house. Both of them are neurologically delayed. They're both considered severely delayed. And then my son had a rare condition called Eagle-Barrett syndrome, which the simplest and quickest way to describe it is he was born without abdominal muscles. So like people that work out get the 6-pack abs and the side abs. He had none of those muscles, is the easiest way to describe it. On top of that, he was only born with 1 kidney that sustained some damage in utero before he was born, which is a product of his Eagle-Barrett syndrome. Because he didn't have the core muscles in his stomach, one of the reasons why we were always susceptible to respiratory viruses was because when you or I would get like a pneumonia, we have that force to be able to cough it up. He didn't have that because he didn't have, when you cough, it kind of presses on those muscles and gives the kind of the back pressure to push it out. Well, he didn't have that. And so that's why if I didn't catch it fast enough and use the machinery in the order that I needed to, I knew I was going to be admitted. It was inevitable. Because what would happen was it would sit in his lungs and it would just compound and compound to the point to where it got really serious pretty quickly. Because of not having core muscles, he had a normal lung capacity, but he just couldn't take those deep breaths because of the way his lungs formed. And then on top of all of that, he had an abnormally large bladder that, like where you and I got the sensation to have to go, he never got that. So I would have to cath him every 4 hours to be able to drain that out. And typically what will happen is if you got fluid in your bladder that you don't get out naturally, essentially that's where kind of urinary tract infections happen, because the sediment that's in there sits in there, and that's what kind of gets infected and all that process starts. And so we had all of that with both of my kids. And then, like I said, I was a stay-at-home parent for 12 years. And then so I was a stay-at-home parent for 12 years. And then one of the reasons why I came back is in 2022, the beginning of that year. One evening we got him home from school. We sent his sister to bed early so that we could have some one-on-one time with him. He was acting normal. That night we went to go brush his teeth, and he threw up a little bit, and which didn't really cause any concern. We thought, well, maybe we hit the gag reflex when we were brushing his teeth. So we're just like, well, we'll put him to bed. He may be catching one of those 24-hour bugs kind of thing. I'll see what he's doing in the morning. Because at that point I was a stay-at-home parent. So I told my wife, I said, if he's not feeling well in the morning, I'll keep him home from school. I'll let his school know, and we'll kind of go from there. Well, that night he was up and down all night, which was uncharacteristic for him. And so I kept him home. I told his teacher. And throughout that whole next day, he absolutely refused to lay down, take a nap. And I would tell him throughout the day, I was just like, buddy, you're not missing anything. You can take a nap. And I said, look at the couch over there. Dad's just going to be sitting on the couch. Nothing's going on. So he still refused. And then that evening, we put him down, didn't hear anything from him. We thought, well, maybe he's just exhausted because he was up and down all night. Well, that next day, I decided I was going to keep him home again because we were butting up right up to a holiday at that point. And I said, I'm going to keep him home. I said, he'll have another day. Plus, we'll have the weekend to kind of make him feel better, because in school, he was in a self-contained classroom. And if he had something contagious, I didn't want to send him in there and have all the other special needs kids possibly get infected with whatever he had at that point. So I sent my daughter off to school, and then that morning I went into his room, and he was awake, and he kind of looked at me, and I walked around him, and I noticed on the right side of his mouth, I saw this dark green streak, just like something come out of his mouth. And so I'm looking at him, and I go, The only thing that's dark green that might come out of your mouth from your body is bile. And why is bile coming out of his mouth? So I get him up. He's kind of floppy, like he can't hold himself up. And that didn't really strike me because he's had times where he was sick before and that happened. So I was just like, he must be getting kind of sick. So I brought him out to the living room. I kind of did my mental checklist of things that I thought I needed to do. He still wasn't, looking like he was feeling better. And so it was honestly just a gut call. So I look at my wife and I go, I think I'm going to take him up to the hospital. I said, I don't know what's going on. Something's off. It's nothing I recognize. And I said, I'd rather take them up there and have them go, nothing's going on. It's just a 24-hour bug and send me home versus him be here and something serious happen. Well, I live outside of Atlanta. I'm on the southwest side, and the children's hospital that we go to is 60 miles north of us, which for those that don't live in Atlanta think, well, wow, that's a long distance to drive. Well, Atlanta takes up most of North Georgia. And so you can drive 150 miles and still be in Atlanta. I mean, that's just how big Atlanta is with all of its counties. So I get on the interstate. I'm flying up there. I'm doing like 90 on the interstate going up there because I don't know what's going on. And as I'm driving up there, he kind of looks like he wants to fall asleep. So I'm snapping my fingers at him because, like when you get a concussion, you don't want someone to fall asleep right afterwards just because of what can happen if you fall asleep after that. So as I'm going up there, I'm just like, buddy, stay with me. And so I'm, at this point in my head, I'm going, something really serious is going on. And I'm trying not to freak out in front of him just because I don't want him to react to it. And so we get up there and we finally get up to the hospital, and I get him out of the van to get him in his wheelchair, and he's really floppy, like more than I'm used to. And I'm just like, something's really going on. So I get up into the ER and I skip the line, and like the security guard's about to walk over to me and like to say, didn't you see the line? You need to get in line, kind of thing. And before they can open their mouth, I go, I don't think he's breathing. And so he sees that, and I can see his body language change, and he snaps his fingers at the nurse there, and we go running. I've never run anywhere in that hospital. Like, we are running full speed back to an ER trauma room. So we get back in that trauma room. Because I had been in that hospital so many times, I instinctually, I got him out of I undid him from his chair. I put him up on the gurney that's there, and I back out of the way, more so for the fact that I'm hoping that they'll let me stay in there while they do their work, because my son's nonverbal and I can tell them everything that's going on. So there's another ER trauma room right next to it that the doors open. So I kind of back off in there. No more than we get in there, and like 30 people out of nowhere, like ants on an anthill, just fly in there, and they start doing all their procedures and things. They immediately start doing chest compressions on, like CPR. They immediately put a line in them to try to get some fluids or antibiotics in them. And so I back off, and the ER doc comes over to me and goes, to the minute, tell me how long he's been this way. And I said, plus or minus 5 minutes, he's been this way, because it took me about 30 minutes to get up there. I said, about 40 minutes. And she goes, okay. She goes off and barks orders at him, comes back to me and goes, explain to me why you brought him up here. And I told her the whole scenario. And she goes, okay. And so she goes over and barks more orders to him. Well, I'm watching the monitor up there because I'd been in the hospital so many times that I'm so used to watching the heart rate and the oxygen levels because of his respiratory issues. And so I'm watching that, and it's barely moving the whole time. And at this point, I'm thinking, man, it's something really serious. I don't know what's going on. And so they get over there, and they, old school, when they would get the paddles out, they get the plastic paddles and put the gel on it, and you'd see them put them together, and they'd go clear. Well, nowadays it's pads. They'll put one on the heart, one on the side, and they'll do that. So they do that, and they shock him. And just like in the TV series that you watch, he literally raises off the table. And I look at that monitor right afterwards, and it goes boop and goes right back to what it's doing. And in that moment, I go, he's not coming back. I knew it in that moment. I was just like, they shocked him. They've been doing CPR for for 15 minutes at this point. He didn't react to any of that. And so they keep doing it. And by the end, they will have been doing CPR for 45 continuous minutes. They will have shocked him like 4 or 5 times. And so the doctor comes over to me and goes, she offers her condolences, and, she pronounces them. And so I walk over and I have a moment to myself, and then I regain composure, and the head of the care team comes in that kind of deals with people that loses loved ones to kind of console me. And so I look right at her and I go, this is going to sound crass and it's going to sound harsh. I said, but I have to compartmentalize this right now. And I said, I need to know certain things right now. And she was, well, what do you need to know? I said, from this point forward, what are you going to do with him? Is he going to go to the morgue? If he goes to the morgue, are you going to talk to the coroner? If he talks to the coroner, you're going to do an autopsy. If you do an autopsy, what are you looking for and how long does that take and what's the wait like? If you don't do an autopsy, I said, what's the process that I need to do to get my funeral home to come up here to get him so I can get him home? And I list off like 8 or 9 questions. And so she literally takes a step back. I don't know if it's just because of how forward I am or what it is. And so she thinks for a second. She goes, well, the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to go talk to the coroner and see if he wants to do an autopsy. I said, okay, fine. So I'm there. At this point, I've already called his mother. I've called my parents, and they know. And my wife's parents are bringing her up because I was just like, you don't need to be driving in your state. Have them bring you up. And so she's doing that. And so the care person comes back and she goes, well, the coroner's decided he's not going to do an autopsy. And I realized later I came off kind of harsh, but I looked at her and I went, why? Why are they not going to do an autopsy? I want to know the answers as to why they're not going to do an autopsy on my son. And so she said, well, typically in a children's hospital, there's only 3 or 4 big reasons. She said, first of all, it's anything abuse related, anything drug related, anything related to the court system. And she said, the last one is if your son was perfectly healthy and then all of a sudden this happened and he died, they would want to know why. She said, but because your son has such an extensive history with his medical issues, the coroner has decided that he's going to just relate it to one of his medical needs. And I said, okay, I'm okay with that answer. And so, he passes away, and then we kind of go through the whole funeral process and what led me into, doing what I'm doing on Facebook. And I mean, even before my son passed away and all that, I can't tell you how many times I was in the hospital for respiratory things and seizure related things and procedures and major surgeries. And so it's definitely been a wild ride in the last 15 or 16 years. So.
Imagine. And you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I have questions as well. And
okay.
It sounds to me like when it happened, you accepted that it happened, you had your moment, but then you just sort of shut yourself down for the necessary things, right?
Well, as a lot of us parents in the special needs world, you learn, at least, I don't know about the mothers per se, but I know a lot of the fathers I've talked to, we've learned to compartmentalize things. Mm-hmm. Traditionally, as men, we're problem solvers. We want to find the answer. We want to, whatever's the best route to get to something, or maybe the fastest route to get to something. And I knew in that moment that his mother was coming up, the grandparents were coming up. I knew that I wanted to get him home as fast as possible to whatever funeral place we were going to use. And so I'm one of those people that I like to know the answers.
No, that makes sense.
I mean, I might not be able to get that answer right then and there, but my motto in the special needs life, even with my daughter still now, is if I expect the worst, let's see, if I hope for the best, expect for the worst, then I'm never surprised. And with my son, with the fact he was so medically fragile, I had to live that way, because otherwise we had a lot of really tense situations throughout his life as it relates to medical needs and procedures and things like that. So it was compartmentalizing was a learned response.
Yeah, I think I can understand this because, yes, if you're looking at the fact that you had, you know, two children and for 18 years, or I think at that point, 16 years it was.
Yeah, it was 16 at that point.
Your son sounding that he had rarer conditions
He did.
comparatively to your daughter.
Yep.
I can't recall the name. Garrett something? Was it?
It's called Eagle Barrett syndrome.
Eagle Barrett?
Yes, eagle like the bird, Barrett like the auto auction.
Okay.
So
Eagle
Barrett
Barrett
syndrome.
So like I'm just thinking about that. And so, as a parent and having to, for many parents at a specific age, kids start developing autonomy, right? They can do a lot of things on their own, that sort of thing. But as a parent, you and your wife didn't have that sort of happen with your son, technically.
Yes and no. He was delayed. He was nonverbal, but I really quickly learned how to read nonverbal cues.
Okay.
In fact, I read somewhere that it says when you talk to someone, it's something like 97 or 98% of communication is nonverbal cues versus the words that come out of your mouth. So,
Absolutely.
like, I got to the point that when there was one time that I took my son into the hospital. That evening, they took an x-ray of his chest, and what was forming in his chest was just barely something. They almost sent us home. In fact, they gave me the option to either get admitted for that night or to go home. And so I said, with his history, I said, even if y'all discharge us tomorrow, I'd like to be here overnight just in case, because I'm 60 miles away. And I said, I'd rather be here if something were to happen versus not. And so early that next morning, they took another x-ray, and the doctor came in after they took the x-ray, and he goes, I don't know how you did it. And I went, how I did what? And he goes, when you brought him in the ER last night versus what I'm seeing now and the difference in the number that we saw, he said, you can, now that I have gone back from what I see this morning to last night, he goes, you can literally see the pneumonia forming. He said, you could have not brought him here any sooner than what you did. You literally brought him in here as it was forming in the hospital. And I said, as a parent, there's a cough that he has. And I knew it that first time I heard it, I was just like, I would go, oh, I need to start my procedures, or, oh, this isn't good. And I heard it. And I was just like, you know what? I need to take him up there. I'd rather go up there and get sent home versus be at home and something happen. So that was how I had to be because he was nonverbal. Now, did we communicate? We did. I could ask him yes, no questions. And if he'd want to do it, he would either go, and make sounds, or he would clap, or he would get really happy about something. And if he didn't want to do it, I mean, he'd stare at me silently like, nope, don't want it. So there was some communication there, but I would always have to ask him in yes, no question form.
Learned.
Yes.
And then obviously he would have learned as you learned to communicate in your own special way. And you said also that your daughter is nonverbal as well.
Correct.
And neurologically delayed.
Correct.
So do you have that sort of same communication system with her?
Similarly, right now she is currently 15 years old, but like both of my kids functioned about 4 to 6 years old. Okay. So to give you this scenario of my daughter is chronologically 15 years old as a teenage girl going through all the woman stuff, but she actually functions at 4 to 6 years old. So I've essentially got a 4 to 6 year old daughter who has all the puberty, all the teenage girl symptoms, but functions at 4 to 6. So as you can imagine, it makes for interesting days some days, especially when my daughter gets ornery, if you will, just with the typical teenage emotions.
Mm.
And so some days it can be quite challenging when I'm trying to get her, motivate her to do something, and she's just like, nope, don't want to do it. So,
Question, and this is it could, it's an ignorant question really,
okay.
because I haven't been sort of exposed to a lot of children that have disabilities or
Mhm.
developmental disabilities.
Okay.
Your kids had issues with cognition for output, but it
Uh-huh.
seems that they maybe had okay cognition for input,
Yes, in basic forms,
basic
meaning
forms.
even though they were both teenagers chronologically, I would have to say it to them kind of in a kindergarten fashion,
Mm.
just because even though they had a lot of issues, what my wife and I believe the driving force of a lot of their issues and delays was their neurological issues. And both of them had missing white matter in their brains as one of the reasons that caused it. So the question that we've always tried to ask, and I don't know if we'll ever get an answer for, is the areas that are missing, is that what's affecting her ability to or not do something, i.e. talk, walk, um, understand what I'm saying, anything more than say on a kindergarten level, that kind of stuff. So that's been the $1,000,000 question ever since they've been born.
Imagine also that while I think it's evident in how you talk about them that you love them
Mm-hmm.
and you're there to support them and give them the best quality of life that they can.
Mm-hmm.
And but it has to be challenging, no? Like for as a parent, but it also has to be challenging for them. Like
It,
that's I think that's where my question lies, really, is that are they aware that from a
well,
neurological standpoint they're behind?
honestly, this is all they've ever known. So
Mm.
I honestly believe, and when my son was around, I believe this is normal life to them. This is what I get. This is what I understand. They knew that they were going to school for their therapies and to learn and try to get them caught up, if you will. Um, but that was all normal life. Like for example, with my son, because I had to cath him because of his condition, there I did that so much that he got to the point that he would literally do this, uncross his legs, and look at me like, "Well, what are you waiting on, old man? Let's get this show on the road." And so, and I always say, a typical normal functioning man, if you were to look at him, go, well, "I need to give you a catheter," that'd be like, "Whoa, what are you doing?" That wasn't my son. My son, he was so used to it that it even when, not to be graphic, but even when I inserted things in, whereas a normal person might flinch to it, it didn't even faze him. I mean, he was just like, it needs to be done. I've got to go to the bathroom. Let's get this show on the road.
I wonder if that's what they knew, if that's all he knew, or
I,
if I would imagine also that if that discomfort was attributed to relief.
I mean, it's quite possible. But the other thing with my son was he had a higher tolerance for pain. So, and in all the times he was upset or hurt, there was only once or twice in the hospital he actually produced tears in pain. It wasn't often. It was more me noticing just the differences in his behavior and going, something's not right here. We need to look at this and plan what our next steps are if we decide to go to the hospital wherever we're going.
I have a question about the evening that your son passed away.
Okay, dokie.
I know there was no autopsy done, right?
No.
And for the reasons that you provided.
Mhm.
But did they have any sort of idea as to what it was that
Well,
contributed to him?
the official cause on his death certificate was sepsis and cardiac arrest due to sepsis. However, as I've said to you earlier, I tend to pick up on things that maybe other people don't.
Mm.
That morning, when I went to go like cath his bladder and all that, his midsection, like where his intestines were, was rock hard, like cinder block wall, rock hard. When I felt that, I was just like, wow, I've never felt that way. Something that was one of the things that made me go, I'm going to take him up to the hospital. I'm not used to this. What's going on? I didn't know what it was at the time. And so I took him up to the hospital. And even as crazy as it sounds, me, for lack of better words, watching my son die in the trauma room, I was still keeping mental note of the words and phrases I was hearing at the time. Like I can go back now and I can mentally picture where every person standing around him was, what they were doing at specific moments the entire time we were there. I mean, that's just kind of how my brain runs. And so I was listening to phrases and things that was going on. So after he had passed, we requested the ER notes from the hospital because I knew that they were going to, if anything, the hospital was going to be very specific so they knew what to charge my insurance company. And so, but I also knew that in their notes, they would be very specific as to what they were saying, what they were doing. And so based on what I felt before we got there and the wording that I heard, it's not official, but I 100% believe that he got gastroenteritis and it went too far. And that's what eventually got him, because I later went on like MayoClinic.com and WebMD and some of the big name places, and some illnesses you can go on there and they'll vary in their responses to what you should do. Like some will say, well, you know, give it X amount of time. If it doesn't change, call your doctor, go to an urgent care, or go to the hospital. Every single one of them for gastroenteritis said, if you see these symptoms, take them to the hospital immediately. And so the night before, it could have been happening all night and we would have had no idea, because it's nothing we would have ever looked for. It's nothing that would have ever been on our radar to say, hey, this is going on. We need to do something about it. So even though it's listed as sepsis and cardiac arrest due to the sepsis, I still to this day, I'll go to my grave saying it was gastroenteritis, because everything lined up with what they said, what I saw, what I felt as it relates to that. So
thank you very much for sharing all of that with us. Your daughter's health, how is she today?
She is doing well. I mean, she has the delay. She has epilepsy, although the seizures have been kept in check with medication. They have been for years, and that's been a blessing. Before my son passed away, we actually were having genetic testing done on both of them, just because we didn't think that there was a magic answer there, but we knew that there's something there that we're not seeing there that could possibly help us in maybe quality of life, or changing just the direction that we're going with them to help them down the road. And I even told genetics, I said, I'm not looking for a golden ticket. There's something that we're not seeing, and y'all could possibly help us. Well, as it stands as of the other day, it's looking like that my son and my daughter and my son have my son, it would be his second rare condition. My daughter, her first rare condition. And as of last year, not only would we be case number one for this the geneticist, we would be case number one, period, across the globe for this condition. And so Emory told us, they said, well, what we do is we have an international database. We put our information in there. And if anybody's doing a study related to what we're looking at, they will find it. Well, we had Denmark and England that were doing a study that we thought was the same thing. And they came back and they said, well, we are, but we aren't. For example, what they were trying to find was there was an alteration to say gene ABCA is what they were looking at. Well, that's not us. We're gene ABCB, which would mean we would be the first one ever for whatever this issue is. Now, they have no name for it. They're still trying to figure out what's causing it and just the characteristics of it. So we haven't been officially diagnosed with it, but that looks like the direction that we're going in with her. Now, does that mean at this point it has not caused any more health issues? It has not caused like no hospital stays or deteriorating health or anything like that, but that's just something that's kind of added to her plate.
eventually one day provide some answers.
It could at some point.
This is when you were talking about the geneticist. It
Mm-hmm.
made me flash back, and I'm not sure if you saw it, but there was a sort of a docu-series on Netflix called Diagnosis.
I think so.
It was fascinating.
Okay.
And I found it fascinating just based on the fact that they, wrote this very well-known columnist. I can't remember her name because I'm terrible with names, but wrote, the situation where they couldn't get diagnosed and put it out in the New York Times, and then they would get responses. And the whole point of it was to essentially do the exact same thing we were talking about. It's like maybe someone's being treated for something similar, and we can either find a name or a therapy, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, son's name was
Zachary,
and he passed away in January 2022.
Yes, January 28th, 2022.
After did you allow yourself to feel?
Almost immediately. One of the things I tell people that the hardest thing I ever had to do as it relates to my son outside of bury him was, he had been pronounced. I was up in the ER trauma room with him till his mother came up, and we were up in there for probably about an hour. And, one of the things I tell people, I said, I noticed specific things. Like I know right after it happened and I was waiting on his mother to come up, like I noticed things like how fast he got cold. And it's a weird thing to think about your son that had just passed away, but that was just something that struck me. I was just like, wow, that was quick. Or how fast he would go from color to what someone in that state what color they would turn, just because of just life processes. And so, but no, the hardest thing we ever had to do was, my wife had been up there and we'd spent some time with him, and we decided to go home. I had to take his empty wheelchair, put all of his cut up clothing on it, and wheel his empty wheelchair through the hospital, down to the van, and drive 60 miles home without him in it. And I tell people, I said, that was the longest, hardest drive I have ever had to make. And at that point, my daughter was in school. She had no idea anything. She understood it a little bit, not to the point you and I would if someone passed away. But my daughter had no idea. She was still at school when we got home. And so all my daughter knew was when I would take my son up to the hospital, I literally, every day he was ever in the hospital, I was with him. When I took him up there, I didn't come home till he was with me. And so this time I noticed she kind of noticed the fact that I'm home, but her brother's not. And so for a while there, she couldn't tell me, but I felt like for a while there, she was angry at me because she was just like, well, you didn't bring him home. And so, and I mean, I didn't take it personally. I mean, that was just kind of how she, with her issues, was grieving. And so, yeah, it was, I physically grieving. I mean, we were really quiet on the way home. I remember we came into the house, and the room I'm in is his room. Because if you can, I'll turn the screen a little bit. You can see his name on the wall in the back. This is his room. And it looked a little bit differently because we had all of his medical equipment and things like that in here. And we came into his room, and I wheeled his wheelchair in here, which, in fact, right by his name, that's his wheelchair back there. I wheeled his wheelchair back there. I have not touched it since that day, almost 2.5 years ago. And I came in here and I put it in there. And at that point, I just kind of lost it for a moment, just because it all just kind of, it hit me, because I had to kind of put it on pause for what I was doing. And so, from that point forward, it was pretty frequently for several months. The old statement that goes, time heals all wounds. My thought process on that is that's a bunch of garbage. Time does not heal all wounds. What time does is it gets you get used to it. Yeah. And the analogy I tell people is like, let's say, for example, you cut yourself. initially it hurts a lot, and then eventually it'll scab and it'll heal over and you'll scar. And I said, but there will always be a reminder of it. And if you bump into that scar enough, it will reopen it.
Yes.
And I said, that's kind of what grief is. You know, it scars over, you forget it about a while, and then maybe you hear a song or have a memory, and something like that just cuts it back open, and it just hits you just as hard. So, yeah, I've probably for the first full year, and even people in the grief community would tell you, it wasn't the first year that was tough for me. It was the second year that really hit me. And so even a good bit into the second year, since then, the waves have gotten farther apart, but I still have my moments.
Like grief can be so complex to start with, but that I feel like, and I will never know this unless immaculate conception happens or something like that. But I'm like, I'm not going to have children, but I can only imagine, and from people I've spoken to in life and know, to lose a child is one of the most painful sort of losses you can go through, because it's not supposed to happen, right? In the way that if you're looking at the world, it's not supposed to happen. We don't think that way.
Yeah, you know, in the traditional sense of, you know, passing the name down and, you know, continuing. You know, I accepted a long time ago because my son, because of his issues, I knew he was never going to have kids. It's just, I knew he was always going to need care. I knew he would, even though he might physically be able to, he would never be able to understand that concept. Or if Lord forbid, by some miraculous manner, he was to have a child, he'd have never been able to take care of it because he needed 24-hour care for himself. And so that was one of the things I battled with, was the fact that now things in my family are out of the natural order of things. And so that was a tough pill to swallow for a long time.
Prior to death.
Well, I mean, I didn't think so much about it prior to, but afterwards it really hit me, because it was more of a concrete idea after the fact, and it was more of a finite idea, if you will, after the fact.
A really potent thing to bring up as well, I think, because we have so many unconscious sort of belief systems and values that are not forefront. And then some great piece of adversity or loss comes along that brings it up for people. And then that's what we call compounding grief. Because it's not just the loss of a child now, it's loss of, say, a legacy or a value set. How do you go and navigate from there? So you said it was, you know, year to 2 years, the waves came often. Now we're looking at the waves are not as often, but they're still there.
Yes, and they will always be there.
Do you find that there's any specific or particular situations or things that happen that trigger a wave of grief?
You know, there's a good number of like songs that I listen to that may not, a lot of the songs that I attribute to him may not be specifically to him per se or grief per se, but the symbolism or the concept in the song reminds me of something about him, or maybe of that moment in time. And if I hear them, and if I'm having kind of a rough day, it'll hit me hard. You know, a lot of my things that trigger me are things that how do I want to put it? It's things that other people do that just irritate me. And what I mean by that is, let's say you're out in public and I see you do something that, it's not your fault that you're doing that. You have no idea what I'm dealing with. I have never, will never go up to a person because they're doing something that just irritates me to no end, because it affects whatever my grief is associating with it. And so it comes down to the fact of, there's an old saying that goes something to the effect of, is it a problem or an inconvenience? Because if it's an inconvenience, you can get around it. If it's a problem, then you got to deal with it. And so a lot of things that trigger me, especially as it relates to kids and all that, is parents that would complain about what I think are inconveniences. And at least initially, I wanted to go up to them and go, you don't understand how good you've got it. You're sitting here complaining about what is clearly an inconvenience, that it's just because either they don't want to do it or you don't want to do it, or something that's a manageable thing that you can change for that issue, whereas it's not a problem. And and I don't and I don't want to lay all my heaviness on them and say, well, at least you've got your child hasn't passed away, that kind of thing. So those were more the things that triggered me out in public. And so again, it's just random things that people would do. And when I would catch myself, I'd be like, I need to go the other way, or I need to leave the store, because this is just irritating me. And I know where I'm heading if I still deal with it.
That's normal though.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Because, and what you're stating there is that, yes, I think right now, and just in general, people are wired to complain.
Yep.
And to shed light on all of the inconveniences that life has to offer. Whereas you'll meet some people who are gratitude based. Just, I get to be in this store right now with my child. I get to have the money to make this grocery purchase. There's mindsets there. I don't think people do things maliciously in a sense when they're complaining. I think it's just a societal norm that they're doing.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is that they're not aware, right? You're not going to go up and tell them, but you still have to carry that weight.
Exactly.
So you getting triggered or annoyed or even angry in those situations, I think, is absolutely normal. And you're recognizing that, okay, I have to change my current scenery because this is really bothering me. That's healthy. Being able to notice that. For people who have lost children, I can't even begin to comprehend or try to even put into words what that could potentially feel like. You have done something. You've started to take this experience and turn it into something else. Can we talk about letters to Zachary?
Certainly. Before my son had passed away, I was seeing a therapist, and I'm very much a proponent of seeing therapy should one need it. Always have been. I've done it on and off. During those seasons, I've done it on and off in my life. And so I was seeing a therapist for some other issues I was dealing with. And honestly, right before he passed away, I felt like I had gotten through that season. And I literally told my therapist, I said, I think we've kind of worked through all this kind of stuff. I'll keep your number. If I should need you, I'll give you a call, set up an appointment. I'm sure I'll have to wait several months, but I'll make another appointment. Okay, great, wonderful. Well, before I had done that, it was right when my son passed away. And so some of the issues I was dealing with before, even though I'd worked through all of them, came back with a vengeance. Because of dealing with grief and death and all that stuff. And one of her suggestions was, have you ever thought about journaling? And at that time I went, I don't know if that's my thing. I said, I don't know. I'll think about it. And that idea kind of sat on the table next to me for probably 6 months. It was one of those things I thought, I don't know if I want to do it. And then I wasn't sure I was a writer per se. Like when I would write, I would have a hard time, at least initially, where like I could feel like it would flow and be something easy to read and easy to understand in layman's terms, if you will. And so one day out of the blue, after I'd gone to a session, I went, I'll try it. And so I said, I'll do it for myself. And so I got on my laptop and I typed something out in a Word document, and I just kept it. I saved it and I kept it to myself. And I kept doing that for a while. And then, like anybody these days, after my son had passed away, I got on social media and I looked for like grief groups and grief related material. And all that stuff. Well, I found a group on Facebook that dealt specifically with losing a child with medical needs. And so I got in that group and I met the admin there and we got to know each other really well. And I mean, I got to a point at one point that I was moderating the group. And so one day I said, well, I journal. I said, do you mind if I post something? She's no, sure, go for it. And so what you learn in any group on Facebook, but especially grief groups, typically they're 95% women. They're probably about 5% men. And of that 5% men, maybe 0.5% actually is active in those groups. And so I've always been active in any group I've been in. So I've been the token male, if you will, or in these grief groups, kind of the unicorn male in these groups, because I don't mind opening up. I'm one of those people that, if I open up because it's something that I'm feeling or experiencing and someone doesn't like it, that's not my issue, that's theirs. And so, not to have a harsh view of it, but that's kind of the sentiment I have about it. So it wasn't my first, it was probably about a month into me writing. I picked just a random thing and it's evolved over time to what it is now. But in the beginning, it was very raw. It was very angry. It was very expletive laden. And I told people, like, I would post what I did, but before I would put like a disclaimer. I would say something to the effect of, I don't sugarcoat anything. This is very open. This is very raw. It's very transparent. And even to this day, I believe people need to see the good, the bad, and the ugly of grief. And I told people, I said, if you feel like this is going to be something that's going to bother you, I said, scroll on by. And so I put it in there and I almost immediately got a response from many women in there that said something to the effect of, you are the first person to ever write something that is exactly what I'm thinking and feeling as it relates to grief. And I went, huh. And so I waited a little while longer and I posted again. I got immediate response, same thing. In fact, I had one lady go, well, this touches my soul. And I said, well, I appreciate that. I said, this is inspired by my son and all that. So I give him the credit versus me. I'm just writing it. And so it kept getting that way. And so the lady that ran the group goes, have you thought about writing a book? And I said, I've thought about it, but at this point, I don't think I have enough material and I don't do well with deadlines. And typically when I write, the reason why it sounds the way it does is because I write in the moment. I try not to manufacture it. I try to be in the moment, whether I'm happy, sad, angry, whatever emotion. And so she said, okay, well, if you're not going to, she goes, if you're not going to do that, have you ever thought about like doing a Facebook page? And I thought, well, I could do that. And so I thought about it for a while and I created one, which is Letters to Zachary. And initially it had 10, 12 followers, kind of your standard for starting a page. And I wasn't getting a whole lot of traction there. And so the way my brain goes with like trying to raise money and all that stuff, I just started reaching out to people. And I reached out to a lot of what I would call the big names in the grief community and said, look, my name is so-and-so. I lost my son on this date. I'm trying to create a page to reach people. If you've got any hints or pointers or tips or anything that can help me to kind of help make a bigger reach, that would be greatly appreciated. And I got several huge names in the grief community say, oh, sure. And they all gave me lists of things that I implemented. And so I started getting a lot of followers really quickly. And like I've since told my wife, I said, if the material wasn't good, I wouldn't have the following I do. It's all based on the material. I said, if I didn't have the response I did, then I wouldn't be where I'm at. And in fact, I probably wouldn't even be talking to you today if it wasn't that way. I said, but because people think the material is what it is and they think it's as good as it is, that's why I'm here. So long story short, I created Letters to Zachary on Facebook. At this point, I'm at 890 followers in 7 months, which to a big name may not be anything, but to me in only 7 months to have almost 900 followers in 7 months, that's huge to me. And
that's people who have consciously decided to follow you. So it's fantastic.
Yeah. And so, and then I told my wife, I said, outside of the followers, what this tells me is maybe I have something here and I want to build on it. Is
Absolutely.
what that, in the most simplistic form, I've got something here that resonates with people. I need to keep building on this, because this is, even though I'm in pain and dealing with this journey, and while I'm in this thing trying to heal from it or get better with it, I'm helping other people. And that's been kind of the motivation to continue this page. Now, I'm on all forms of social media. And in fact, I just joined TikTok 2 months ago. And a man my age doing TikTok, that's been an interesting experience.
Well,
Because
I'm with you.
I mean, I only got in there because I heard there was a huge grief community on TikTok, is the only reason why I got on there. So that's more why I got on there. But yeah, the letters to Zachary kind of grew out of the fact of me journaling to get my feelings out, to just, it was more or less so, because I knew that if they sat inside, it would just eat me alive. And so it was more to get it out, to get it on paper. And once it was out of me, then I wouldn't worry about it. And so that's kind of where it stemmed from, and what it's blown up into is what Letters to Zachary is.
Couple questions, well, just before we clue up for today, because I feel like I could continue talking to you about this stuff. You had mentioned that your therapist had initially said journaling, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Was there anything about journaling that doesn't resonate with you right away?
I think it was more just the act of writing. I mean,
Okay.
I'm, you may have noticed, but I'm like my father. I could talk to a wall. And so I'm really good at running my mouth, but to actually take time to write it down in a formulaic way, if you will, and so that people can understand it. Like every time I would write before, I had a really hard, once I got started, I was great, but I had a really difficult time starting, like to the point it always discouraged me, where I just stopped. And so, and then on top of that, my career before I became a stay-at-home parent was education. And so I used to have to, because I taught physical education, so I would have to send correspondence out to the whole school when I would do something for the school. And my principal would always want to check it over before I sent it out. My principal absolutely 100% hated my writing, hated it. Like I would get it back and it would bleed red. She hated it so much. And so when I started journaling, I thought, is it going to be the same way? Well, since then, over the years, I've kind of learned how to write, and my vocabulary's increased because of just love of crosswords. And so if that first post in the group hadn't gotten the response it would have, I may not have continued. But because it got such the response, I thought, well, maybe I have changed my writing style. Maybe I have learned something that, that is easier for people to understand, and my thoughts are fluid, and, it just flows. And so it was more the physical process of it that I was just like, I don't know if I really want to do that. That just seems like too much work.
Sense. And I think that when you're journaling as well, like it's not business. So, anybody that's at home and wants to like look at journaling as a way of like working through their mental health, even if you have, I understand that you were looking at it from a formulaic sort of perspective. The therapy behind writing is just literally what's ever in your head is a great starting point. So if the word, FUCK is just what's in your head, write it on paper.
Certainly.
If your feeling is anger, write anger on paper. You can go back later and say, okay, I was clearly angry in this period. What was making me angry? It's that journey. So I'm really glad that you did that. So now you're in that sort of process where you're trying to show men there's power and vulnerability. And why do you think that that's important?
Because I'll say it this way, the most common comment I get from women on my page, or to me personally, is, well, my husband or significant other is not opening up. How do I get them to open up? And so I go, well, first of all, in my opinion, it's a simple 2 or 3 steps. I said, but you have to be receptive to be able to do it. I said, first of all, I said, men are taught from birth that their feelings come second, period. I said, there are many houses across this country that have that phrase on the wall that says, was it happy wife, happy life?
Yeah.
And I go, that right there explains it. It says that the wife or the mother comes first. And I said, fine. Most men wouldn't bat an eyelash to that. However, I said, the other issue is men are taught opening up, being vulnerable is a sign of weakness. I'm old enough to be still of the generation, tape it up and walk it off, rub some dirt on it. Yeah. Are you injured or are you hurt? There's a difference, that kind of thing. And so, my age and older has to kind of overcome that. And so what I tell women is first of all, it's my job here to help you to understand the man's brain. I said, a man will come up to you, and I said, first of all, you have to create, and I hate to use the catchphrase, but a safe space for him. I said, because that's first and foremost. I said, if you don't, he's not going to open up. Second of all, I said, no, I said, if he feels like it's important enough to come up to you and tell you it's important. I said, so if your response is, I can't believe you're upset about that, you blow it off, you think it's less than what your opinion is, or something to that effect. I said, men are going to give you 2 or 3 chances. And I said, if you do it 2 or 3 times, I said, they're done. I said, men are very matter of fact for a large portion. And I said, you can't do that. I said, even if in the back of your brain you think, why are you complaining about this? I said, if you say that or show that, I said, they're going to pick that up. I said, you can't do that. I said, the other thing that you have to understand is, for men, you have to be someone willing to let them be vulnerable. And if you're not, they're not going to open up to you. So, I believe, years ago, especially something online, I was dealing with some issues and I was complaining about it a lot. And I finally got to the point I was just like, instead of complaining about it, I need to do something about it. And so, I'm a person as a man. If I see another person doing it, then in my brain, I go, well, if they're doing it, well, maybe it's not so bad, or maybe I can do that. And so, am I the manliest man? Do I ride motorcycles and hunt and all that kind of the stereotypes? No. And, even the men that are on the page, I go, am I asking you to come cry on my shoulder? No, I'm not asking you to do that. But what I'm saying is if you come onto this page or you comment on something of what I've posted about that you agree with, and even if you're vulnerable, I said, it's my job to protect what your thought is. I said, I will not allow anybody, male or female, on my page to bash, look down upon whatever it is you feel like is your issue. That's what my guarantee is on the page. And I said, and then if you've got issues outside of that you want to talk about, I said, I'm within about a 2-minute response time on my phone, on instant message, on DMs, whatever. So the initial draw to doing the page was I got so frustrated in the other groups that there were so few men. And I've since learned that men don't go into groups that are majority women because men have been taught that women have learned that they'll take whatever they've been told and they'll learn 10 years down the road. They'll go, well, remember what you said on April 2nd, 2024 at 2:08 p.m. And men don't want it thrown back in their face. And that's the other thing I tell women. I said, you can't throw it back in his face. If you say you're done with it, then you're done with it. I said, if you bring it back, he's going to remember that you brought it back. And so this works in relationships. It works in grief. And so ultimately it comes down to the page was because I wanted to create that example of, hey, look, I'm a man, this is kind of what my life is like. Here's the obstacles I've had. Yeah, I've gotten I've had sorrow, sadness, crying, sobbing, anguish. I've been a depression survivor for 21 plus years. I have anxiety. I got diagnosed 2 years ago at 45 with ADD of all things. And so, and I will talk about all of them. And so, you know, my example is the fact that I am an example. I'm just like, if you want to talk, let's talk. I'm not here to charge you. I'm not here anything. If you want to hear, open up. Because if you're talking about someone, I don't know who's in your circle. So you don't have to worry about it ever getting back to whoever you're worried about it getting back to. So that's kind of the ballpark and nutshell of why I created the page outside of just helping with grief. It's to show men by example that you're not going to get crucified if you open them up about, like in my case, the most devastating thing I've ever dealt with. I mean, I know society wants us to suppress it as men and, you know, to move on and not, you know, have a short amount of time to deal with it and keep going. I'm just like, I'm not that way. Forget that.
Society has it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
These subscriptions. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that I applaud you for being so open with your feelings and your emotions and talking about them and creating a safe space on your page. And monitoring what kind of comments come in place, because more men need to speak up, right? And if we're looking at suicide statistics,
oh yeah,
who sorry, I was about to say it wrong. Men who die by suicide do so by taking extreme, fatal measures.
certainly.
Where often women use less extreme measures for
Certainly.
die by suicide. So, like, if the difference is for any man, depending on where it doesn't matter where you live or what your life is like, messaging a stranger on the internet could save your life just by sharing what's been weighing you down. Do that.
Oh yeah.
Jason's here. Letters to Zachary. You can find him on Facebook. You can find me on social media. I'm open. If you need to talk to someone because you're in a rough place, hey, send me a message. I'll make time. That's what I want to see, is more men showing vulnerability and talking more. And also, I love the idea that you're sort of coaching women on how to allow that to happen, and because they play a part as well, right? So we need to make sure that we can create the spaces needed for men to be able to process emotions adequately.
Well, and I say, I've said online several times, I said, it doesn't have to be in a therapist office. It doesn't have to be online. If you've got guy friends that you can talk to and you're in the garage fixing a car, or you're at the bar, or you're at a sporting event, I mean, good Lord, it doesn't have to be one specific place. And then the other thing the more comical thing that I say about it is, I said, you know, men are the species that say, well, I don't care what anybody else thinks. Nobody's going to tell me what I am and am not going to say. I said, but yet you let the internet and significant others and everybody else tell you what to say and hinder you from, you know, you claim that you're open and upfront and brash and all that, but really, are you? And, you know, I always say to people, I said, especially when you're posting online, I said, who cares what someone online says? I said, you know how many stupid opinions there are online? There's billions of them. And I said, even though they make it towards you, I said, my philosophy online is if you don't like my opinion, I'll block you and move on, keep going. I mean, there's 8 billion people on this earth. I'm not going to let one of y'all, you know, because I'm feeling something that you disagree with.
And it's
So,
just digital disinhibition anyway. So it's not like it's not even really directed at you. It's just something that triggers them in that moment, and they don't care. They're so disconnected from reality when they're online that they don't have the immediate consequence that they just said a really awful thing to someone, right?
certainly.
But we are definitely a little over time today, but it was a wonderful conversation. I really want to thank you for
Thank
coming
you.
on and having this discussion with me. You can follow Jason on Facebook, Letters to Zachary. It's a blog page. Remember, if you're going over there, be kind. Try your hand at reading his blog, comments, all of those things. You can find him on Twitter, actually X, right? I think that's what we have to call it now.
Yeah, X, Instagram, and TikTok. And my call sign on there is at letters, the number 2, Zachary, Zachary. On Facebook, it's letters TO, Zachary. So it's a little different on Facebook. It's only different on the other ones because I couldn't get it that way on the other ones.
Fair. I will link all of this as well in the show notes for this.
Okay.
Yes, anybody that's home and listening, thanks for tuning in to Pod My Noggin, and we'll see you next week.